Wilder versus Ortiz. The rematch for Deontay Wilder's WBC strap takes place the 23rd of November, which really isn't too far away, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this video. I'm really excited about this fight. I think it's getting quite a lot of criticism from especially the AJ fanboys, even the kind of boxing's objective and neutral fans have slated it quite heavily. I think that they appreciate it's a good fight, but Wilder really should be fighting, or should have fought, Dillian Whyte probably by this point. If we put the failed test to one side, the lead up to that point, a pretty strong case can be made. Obviously, Wilder admitting himself that he would make Whyte wait for a considerable period of time. But that aside, the fight is here, it's going to happen. So discussion about the validity and justification of it for or against are irrelevant. We can do that after. I'm really excited about the fight. I think it's a good fight. I do have to tip my hat to Wilder for kind of publicly stating he wants to rematch his two most controversial fights in Fury and Ortiz. And there's merit to that, you know. How many times did we see somebody like Canelo get through a very, very tough fight without ever kind of talking about a rematch with Lara or even Trout? I don't think there was a huge clamor for a rematch, to be fair, maybe Lara. And he did, of course, rematch Triple G, let's get that right. But what I mean is that it's not very often that a fighter will take responsibility and say, you know what, this wasn't right, there's doubt here, let's go back and erase all doubt. Whether or not you think that's a ruse for avoiding other specific fights or not, again, not for this video. This video is purely for the analysis and prediction for the fight itself. Gun to my head, I think Wilder wins by knockout in a pretty similar fashion. I don't think you can grow extra chins. And well, Ortiz took Wilder's straight right relatively well in the first couple. I think the very first one he landed flush. Ortiz literally brushed it off and continued forward. But subsequently, it felt like every time Wilder threw, it was kind of... And I was surprised how easily he was able to land the right hand on Ortiz in the first fight. And equally surprised when I rewatched the fight again. In my mind, Ortiz was more dominant than he was. I still think he was winning the fight, and I think the judges' scorecards were pretty horrendous when the fight was called. But I do think Wilder was doing much better than we were giving him credit for. I also thought he was doing much better in the Fury fight than some people thought he was doing, coincidentally enough. And again, I watch almost every fight entirely objectively, and I feel very lucky that I can watch boxing from an objective standpoint. It's very rare that I have a real favorite in the fight. Admittedly, I really wanted Joshua to beat Ruiz, not so much because I like Joshua. I mean, he's a good guy, great for the sport, but it's because he's great for the sport that I like him. He brings so much attention and extra money to the sport that I love. So I don't like when I'm rooting for a fighter to win because it's less enjoyable. I'm kind of the edge of my seat kind of stuff. Most fights I can enjoy as an entirely neutral and an objective observer. And I think you're able to see far more in a fight when you are truly objective and truly neutral. And I'm not sure what was coloring my opinion. Maybe it was the AJ Wilder thing, but I don't think so. I think I was seeing it. I think there's that bias where we give the underdog more credit for something than they deserve to be getting. And then you see it in the kind of cold light of day. And you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe he didn't do quite as well, or maybe he did better than we thought. But Wilder was landing that straight right hand with regularity. Equally, Ortiz was able to land his straight left down the pipe, probably more often as well, but with far less devastating effects. He did hurt Wilder quite badly, I think, in the 7th. Of course, there was a controversy. That's really what spawned the rematch. The extra time. And again, I love Paulie Malignaggi's color commentary. He's like, guys, what are they doing? What are they doing? Guys, what are they doing? He was the only one in the commentary team to really call foul as to what he was witnessing. And obviously Wilder was a house fighter, so it's maybe not the done thing, but he didn't give two shits. He just called it as he saw it, which I liked. But to that point, I think it was quite back and forth. Ortiz was landing more, but when Wilder landed, it seemed to be doing more. I did like Ortiz's body work, but I don't really know how much value there is in punching Wilder to the body. He's very chiseled. I think he wasn't as chiseled in the Fury fight. I think he'll be fairly well trained and well disciplined for this, so I'd expect him to be in, again, fantastic shape. I think he probably trained maybe the hardest he ever has for the Ortiz fight, because he knew to that point his prior tests hadn't been that stringent, hadn't been that tough, and he knew this was like all eyes on him. You're fighting a real boxer, let's not humiliate ourselves. So I think he was in peak physical condition against Ortiz, and I expect him to be in the rematch. And when Wilder was hurt, you saw Ortiz kind of throwing a proper flurry to the body and seemed to do very little. I'm not saying you shouldn't go downstairs, because if anything, it helps bring the gloves down. But to me, I think that if Ortiz is running on a limited tank, I wouldn't put too much downstairs. Wilder can be hurt upstairs. But I think Wilder has wildly and vastly underrated defense. He was catching some of those straights on his glove. Some of them he ate with his face, fairly. But I think he is more elusive and he has much better reaction speed. I would say maybe he has the best reactions, short of Fury, in the heavyweight division. Very, very, very quick. Cat quick. That straight right hand comes from nowhere, and it's thrown with speed and devastating power. Absolutely devastating power. I'm calling Wilder to win the fight, like I said, probably by mid-round stoppage. But Ortiz hasn't looked great since the Wilder fight. In his most recent fight, the Hammer fight, he looked laborious. He reminded me of, I don't know, that kind of Derek Chisora mindset when he's not really motivated. He doesn't really want to be in the fight, but he just does what he has to do. Applauding performance. And you can't really blame him for that. Hammer isn't a world star, and Ortiz probably knew in his head that he's a lot better than him. And he was, but he didn't look spectacular. He looked very old. I've seen all the training footage I can find online of Ortiz. He looks to be in probably the best shape of his career. But I have to say, I notice he's getting bigger. Definition building, physique building. And that isn't what failed him in the first fight. It was a lack of stamina. He got tired, and he slowed down and became more available to hit. I think instead of trying to, unless they acknowledge the fact that they can't go 12 rounds with Wilder, maybe they're bulking up for a really kind of intense 4 or 5 rounds, kind of almost amateur style, hoping he can tag Wilder, catch him while he's cold, and take him out there. And that's entirely possible, by the way. I think the first maybe 1 to 3, maybe 1 to 4 rounds could be quite electric. I think Wilder will be high off his Dominic Breazeale devastating first round KO. And I think that Ortiz will be... I'm kind of worried for Ortiz as well, in the sense that, if he's going to come in the best shape of his life, I think it's very easy for, in any sport, when you've been training really well, and you start, you're like, I have so much energy, and you use more energy than you have ever before, thinking, I have limitless energy, and you realize halfway in, you're like, oh wait, no, I'm still tired. After all this training, I'm still tired. He might kind of lull himself into a false sense of security because he's trained so hard. I think that's a real danger as well, and he might tire in a similar kind of fashion. But I do think he'll be more dangerous. I think he might be punching a little bit harder. He's doing a lot of kind of explosive training by the looks of it. And from what I can gather, he's literally eating for the first time like a pro fighter who's in training for a big fight. A lot of greens, a lot of protein. So definitely a change in his body mass. Whether he can keep it up until the 23rd, I'm not sure. But I know that he's living in a 1-bedroom studio with his trainer in his little camp, and he's completely committed to this. He's isolated himself from his family. So if Ortiz was ever going to win, this is probably his best bet. Maybe if he did this 10 years ago. He is 40 years old, allegedly, probably older. But I think at least from the last 5 years, maybe this is the best chance he has from a physical conditioning point of view. I love his jab. I love his jab straight left. Very, very fundamentally sound. He throws a very nice 1-2. Nice counter left hook as well. Nice counter right hook as well. He throws a nice jab. He can also kind of hook off the jab as well. I don't know if you noticed, but his right hand is almost always ready to hook as well as jab. He's Cuban, again, solid fundamentals. I do think that maybe Ortiz is hyped a little bit. I should probably wrap it up. I'm turning into a Dwyer style. My pick is Wilder mid-rounds, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ortiz did something dramatic fairly early on. I'm looking forward to the fight, guys. Let me know what you think, who you think is going to win. Where does the winner go from here? Are we looking at a Wilder-Ruiz unification early next year? Who knows?